Well, it's been the time to look at it for about 3 years because I've been lobbying Treasury for that period of time. And I had hoped to be able to move the situation on prior to this, but frankly, Treasury is appearing particularly stubborn about it. And I felt so strongly about it that I thought, well, if I can't move it, I hand the matter over to the members of Tynwald and let them decide which way they want this to go.
We heard quite recently with the unemployment figures from the Policy and Reform Minister that this is one of the government's big priorities to get people into work. But does it seem to be at odds with that message that there isn't this in place already?
Well, it's got to be very important, excuse me, indeed, to protect those going into work, particularly and specifically those on lower incomes. And here I'm specifically targeting people on or below the living wage, which is £9.76 an hour. I'll try not to throw too many numbers at you this morning, but so effectively, what happens at the moment is that somebody on or just below the living wage sees 10% of their income taken back by government in tax and insurance. Now, to be fair to Treasury, they've done a lot of work in recent years to move the personal tax allowance up, but nothing much at all has happened for the low paid with regard to national insurance. So for somebody, excuse me, at that level, you're going to see them pay approximately 3 times as much national insurance as tax at that level. Now, what's happening in comparative terms is that we've kept our thresholds for national insurance very low, and the UK is progressively now moving those thresholds up. So, for example, on the Isle of Man, and I really don't want to throw too many numbers at you, but in the Isle of Man, we all pay national insurance as employees at 11% once you get to £125 a week or above. In the UK, you don't start paying national insurance until you've earned £166 a week. Now, coincidentally, to my motion, the Conservative Party are talking very, excuse me, firmly about moving that threshold up and continuously taking it up. And I'm very concerned that our people in the Isle of Man who are on low incomes are actually going to be left behind. and I want Tynwald to think about this and really encourage Treasury to approach it with a more imaginative and creative manner rather than we've seen so far. Now, as I say, to repeat myself, the Treasury Minister's done well on the taxation side, and I've got huge regard, I have to say this, I've got huge regard for the senior officers in national insurance and the benefit system. I really have, and I've worked with them. But I think, I have to be blunt here, I think they're being stubborn and refusing to grasp the issue, which I'm personally trying to get over, and I believe and hope that other members take the same or similar views and that we can look at this in a much more creative way, as I said.
So what would be the solution here? Would it be something similar to the UK and raising that level, or do there need to be lower tiers as well?
I don't think we should follow the route the UK's taken by lifting the threshold right across the board, because effectively you start to lose significant amount of national insurance income, which goes, as you know, to health and to pensions and benefits, etc. I think we have to specifically target those on or under the living wage and approach it in a similar way to tax. So, for example, if you, Sean, ended up paying more tax than you should have done, you would expect to get a rebate at the end of the year. And I think what we should be doing is saying, okay, let's look carefully at the amount of national insurance that somebody pays currently who is on or under the living wage and give them a rebate at the end of the year. And hopefully that rebate would come in at a time when, for example, the heating costs of the house were going up, or they were facing Christmas, etc. So I think it would be a pretty good way to respond to it without it costing a huge amount of money. One of the observations that have come from the officers, effectively, and politicians to some degree, not entirely, but has been, oh, well, we have a benefits system. Well, I don't agree with that as the solution. In other words, if you're in that position, you go on benefits. My attitude is, hang on a second, if we're taking nearly £2,000, and it is pretty well that, of somebody on living wage to take it back into government coffers, why don't we just let them keep as much as they can of their own money and keep it simple? Because anybody who has had any dealings with the benefit system knows that it can be very complicated and constraining to get into, and then you sort of get locked into it. So let's get to a situation where those on lower incomes keep more of their own money.
Well, you talk about this coming from employee contributions, but what about self-employed? Do you think there needs to be some change there as well?
Up to now, Sean, I've focused on the employee side. The arrangements for those self-employed are somewhat different, but I have no reason to think that they shouldn't also be examined concurrently with the employee's circumstances.
And just finally then, the wording of your motion is specifically for Tynwald to be of the opinion. You're not calling specifically for an action at this point. What would you see as the next step if you were to get support for this?
I've timed it so that hopefully the Treasury Minister can come back with some proposals before we enter into the budget process next year, because I'm sure you appreciate that as members of Tynwald, we either vote for or against the budget. You can't vote for 9/10 of it or 95% of it. You vote for it or not. And I think it's now long overdue that we address the issue of how much we deduct from those on or below the living wage. And I think that if members support this motion, this December, Tynwald, that there's time for Treasury to think creatively and come forward with some, if necessary, interim proposals to help those on the lowest pay.